Melampos's renown as a healer was so great that the king of Argos himself sent for him. And there, in the great throne room of Argos, Phylacus, the king of Argos, explained to the healer Melampos that his own son, the prince Iphiclus, was afflicted, is perhaps the politest way to say it. Whilst Iphiclus had a wife, and a beautiful wife, a desirable wife, and of course as the prince, the heir of the kingdom, he had but to twiddle his fingers and any beautiful woman or handsome man of his choice, well, almost all of them, would have thrown themselves at him without askance or question. But as much as Iphiclus had charm, he was handsome, he was clever, he was, well, as kind as any prince is ever likely to get, he had the wish to perform, but not the ability to perform. And this was the arena that the king of Argos wished Melampos to attend to. Could he do anything to well, not quite resurrect the dead, but restore to vitality the bits that were so bereft of vitality? Well, Melampos sat and he thought, and he discussed with the young prince all of the various treatments he had received already from other physicians of various types, none of the ointments and lotions and potions and treatments had done a damn thing. Beautiful women had been sent to his chambers to perform all manner of licentious acts. Beautiful men had been sent to his chambers to perform even more licentious acts. And all that had happened was that poor old Iphiclus became more and more frustrated, more and more irate at the fact that bits would not work as they were meant to work. And Melampos, being a proper physician, got out the rubber gloves and conducted the necessary examination and saw that everything was where it should be, and there were no obvious injuries, there were no obvious reasons why he was unable to do his manly duties. So he said, I must go and consult with the gods, with the spirits of great Olympus themselves, and see what wisdom can be gleaned from them. So off he went to one of the great open-air temples, and there he called for an ox to be brought forth at great expense, but the bill was going to the king, so expense was no issue, no barrier, and the ox was brought forward. And Melampos recited the prayers, he cast handfuls of barley grain, he lit the fires, he burnt the incense, and the vegetarians amongst you may wish to block your ears, he slit the ox's throat, and the blood gushed out upon the altar, and the poor beast fell down dead and lay there. Now, as is the done thing, certain parts of the ox may be eaten by the person performing the sacrifice once cooked, but other parts must be offered up to the gods and spirits for them to consume. And so Melampos slit the belly of the oxen, and its entrails fell out. And then he went and seated himself away from the pungent aromas of the ox's innards as they entered into the considerable heat of Greece. And he prayed and recited, and he watched for an omen for guidance. And there, unsurprisingly, two great vultures flew down and hopped towards the dead oxen, and they pecked and they pecked and they gorged upon the still warm innards. And when they looked as if they couldn't possibly eat any more, Melampos heard them talking, not the screeching and cawing that you might expect, for Melampos, like Dr. Dolittle, had the ability to hear and understand the true voice of animals, a gift, it is said, all humans once possessed in the very, very, very distant past, before we broke our troth with the animal realm and lost the ability to understand what they were saying to us. So whilst to anybody else listening to those vultures, all they would have heard was cawing and croaking and scraping noises, when Melampos listened, he heard voices like human voices. And the birds were saying to each other, "We have not had so great a feast since the days when the great prince himself attended a sacrifice, when the great king of Argos made his sacrifice of a bull many, many years ago." Well, he thought about this, and quietly, gently, he walked towards the two birds, and they looked up at him. And Melampos said to them, "Do you remember anything strange about the sacrifice made by the king and his son all those many years ago?" And the birds, who were in that pleasant post-feasting spirit where you're so gorged you can barely move. I'm sure if they had been wearing belted trousers, they would have had to let them out a notch or two. They sat back, and instead of flying away, they could probably barely take to the wing. They were so gorged on offal from the ox, fell to talking with Melampos. And one of them said, "Yes, I remember that the little boy, the little prince, was so frightened by the blood and the guts that as his father waved around the sacrificial dagger, the little boy started to cry and cry and cry, and the father, trying to assuage him, threw the knife away. Why, it is even over there still now." And the birds waved a wing towards a tree, an oak tree, a little further down away from the temple. And Melampos thanked the birds, and they waddled off, and he walked down towards the oak tree, and expecting at first to see the sacrificial dagger maybe in the roots of the tree, or the detritus of years' worth of rotting leaves, instead saw that the dagger was stuck firmly in the trunk of the tree, its blade wedged in. And he placed a hand upon the tree and said to the spirit of the oak, to the hammer dryad, "If you can hear me, speak to me now. Tell me, does this knife wound you?" And the dryad, the spirit of the tree, said, "Yes. Oh, yes. Long ago, this blade was plunged into my trunk. Oh, the pain then, the pain now. I was so angry, I cursed the king and his son for their carelessness." "With what did you curse the king and his son?" asked Melampos. "I cursed them that there should be no further continuance of their line. It should end with the boy." And at once, of course, Melampos understood that this curse of impotence that lay upon the prince was there to ensure that no issue should come forth from the royal house of Argos beyond his own generation. And he fell to talking with the dryad and negotiated a treatment. And the dryad recommended that if the offending blade be pulled from its trunk, it should be boiled clean. And the liquid, the waters from the boiling, should be drunk by the young prince, and this would treat his unfortunate malaise and lift the curse, and full function should be restored to the royal line. And at once Melampos pulled out the blade, and it took some pulling, for it had been wedged in there for many a long year, since even before the boy had started puberty, let alone now. But it came out eventually with much tugging, and the metal of the blade was rusted from those years and years and years being stuck in the open air of sun and rain and all manner of weather falling upon it. But he took that blade and he smeared some mud upon the wound done to the trunk of the oak tree to ensure no infection should go into the oak tree. And he felt the warmth and appreciation of the dryad being shown towards him as he placed that sealing protection upon the trunk of the tree. And he took the blade and he walked back to the temple where the fires on which he had cast the incense were still burning. And he took a metal pot, some water from the sacred spring, placed the blade in the pot and the pot upon the fires. And even as various other carrion birds came down to peck at the remains of that poor old ox, the water in the pot bubbled and boiled. And when at last it had been there for what he felt to be quite long enough, he took it off the heat, gingerly removed the blade, which was now clean, flushed away of all of the rust, it was gone. And in that pot was a reddish, brackish looking liquid, which smelt of iron and rust. But he carried this liquid from the temple to the palace, and there presented it to the king and said all that had happened, the sacrifice and the vultures and the dryad, and now this potion which must be drunk by the young prince. Well, by now, of course, the potion had become quite cool. And the young man, tall and bronzed and athletic, and you would have thought the most virile of young men, strode forth and, without so much as a pause, swigged back the liquid in the pot, grimaced because it tasted absolutely revolting. But as we are told, all of the best medicines, apparently, do taste revolting. And it coursed throughout his system, and the curse was lifted. And even as he swigged that liquid, blood flowed to places where blood had not flowed before, and Iphigos experienced sensations and urges he had never experienced, for the curse had been upon him since before he had started puberty, and even though all of the changes had come upon him, certain things had not come upon him. And thus possessed of this most unexpected sensation, he grabbed his wife by the hand, dragged her off to the nearest bedroom, and ensured that the house of Argos would continue for a good few more generations of the royal lineage. And the reputation of the great healer, of Melampos himself, spread and spread and spread. And the king said, well, I will reward you well. In the first instance, the prince made a reward of a great herd of oxen, for who knew when more oxen would be required for offerings in the temple, and his oxen were so magical, so fertile and virile in ways that he himself had never been, that they were famed throughout the land of Argos and well beyond. And it was an immense gift to Melampos to have this cattle. But when the prince's wife became heavy with child, and proof was received that the prince was not only performing but fertile as well as virile, the king was so overjoyed he summons Melampos back to the palace and said, on top of the reward my son has already given you of the cattle, I will make to you a reward anything you demand of me, which is a rash thing for anyone to say, but especially for a king to say. Melampos thought long and hard, and he said, I ask of you this, great king. Grant to me 1/3 of your kingdom. Grant to my brother Bias 1/3 of your kingdom. And you retain the other third, and of course in time your son will inherit that third. And at first the king was mortified at such a demand. I mean, what king ever gives up 2/3 of his own kingdom willingly? But it was only a couple of months earlier that he had been facing the absolute end of his lineage. No kingdom whatsoever to continue on, to be fought over by foreign princes and rival armies and enemies. And better 1/3 of something than nothing of anything. And so after he prayed and he thought and realised, of course, that an offer, even a foolish and unwise offer, is an offer that has to be honoured, he parted with 2/3 of his kingdom, one to Melampos and one to his brother Bios, And that is why, in the centuries to come, Argos, ever afterwards, had 3 kings. One descended from the traditional king of Argos, one descended from brother Bios, and one descended from the famed healer Melampos. And it continued thus for many a long year, until one day even the 3 great kings fell.